In January 1921, $1 bought 64 German marks. In January 1922, $1 bought 191 marks. In January 1923, $1 bought 17,972 marks. By November 1923, $1 bought 4.2 trillion marks. Trillion. With a T, Germans who had saved their entire lives woke up to discover their life savings could not buy a loaf of bread. Workers were paid twice a day because money lost value between morning and afternoon. Wheelbarrows of cash could not purchase a single meal. A lifetime of discipline and frugality was erased in 18 months. The Weimar hyperinflation is treated as ancient history, a cautionary tale from a distant time and place. Something that could never happen in a modern, sophisticated economy. Something that could never happen here. But when you study the stages of Weimar's collapse, when you map the policy decisions and economic conditions step by step, you discover something terrifying. We are following the same playbook. Not approximately, precisely, stage by stage, policy by policy, denial by denial. In 1921, German officials said inflation was temporary. In 1922, they said it was under control. In 1923, the currency ceased to exist. The stages took 3 years from beginning to end. We are currently in stage 3. And if the pattern holds, 2026 is our 1923. Let me show you exactly how it happened then, how it is happening now, and what you must do before the final stages arrive. To understand how the Weimar collapse is repeating, you need to understand what actually caused it. Because the popular narrative is wrong. The textbooks blame reparations and war debt. That is part of the story. But the real cause was policy choices. Choices that are being replicated today. Germany emerged from World War I with massive debts. War bonds had been sold to the public. Promises had been made. The government owed money to its own citizens, its own banks, its own institutions. Sound familiar? Then came the Treaty of Versailles. Germany was required to pay reparations to the Allied powers. The amounts were enormous. The country did not have the gold or foreign currency to pay, but the payments were demanded anyway. The German government faced an impossible choice. They could default on reparations and face occupation. They could cut spending and face revolution from an impoverished population. Or they could print money. They chose to print. The Reichsbank, Germany's central bank, began buying government bonds with newly created marks. This is called debt monetization. The government spends money it does not have. It borrows by issuing bonds. The central bank buys those bonds with money it creates from nothing. The government gets to spend, the central bank's balance sheet expands, and the currency slowly dies. At first, the printing seemed harmless. Inflation was modest. The economy seemed to be recovering. Officials congratulated themselves on avoiding the pain of austerity. The people did not notice because wages were rising along with prices. The money illusion held. But inflation is cumulative. Each round of printing made the next round necessary. As prices rose, tax revenue fell in real terms. The government needed to print more to cover the gap. As printing increased, prices rose faster. The gap widened. More printing, higher prices, a doom loop that fed on itself. The key insight is this. Hyperinflation is not caused by a single event. It is caused by a policy choice, repeated over and over until the currency breaks. Germany did not wake up one day in hyperinflation. They walked into it step by step. Each step seemed manageable. Each step made the next step inevitable. America is walking the same path. And we are further along than most people realize. Let me break down the Weimar collapse into 6 stages and show you exactly where America stands in each one. Stage 1. Massive debt accumulation. In Weimar Germany, this happened during and after World War I. The government borrowed heavily to finance the war. Bonds were sold to the public with promises of repayment. By 1919, German government debt was approximately 150% of GDP. In America, the parallel is obvious. Federal debt currently exceeds $34 trillion. That is approximately 125% of GDP. It was 35% in 1970. It was 55% in 2000. It was 100% in 2012. It has accelerated dramatically in the past decade, but the official debt is only part of the picture. Unfunded liabilities for Social Security, Medicare, and government pensions exceed $200 trillion by some estimates. These are promises made but not funded. They are future obligations that will require either default, benefit cuts, or money printing. The foundation of currency collapse is debt that cannot be repaid through normal means. Germany had it. America has it. Stage 1 is complete. Stage 2. Structural deficits become permanent. In Weimar Germany, the government could not balance its budget even in peacetime. Reparations payments, social spending, and a weakened economy created deficits that persisted year after year. The gap between revenue and spending became a permanent feature. In America, the federal government has run deficits for 50 of the past 54 years. The brief surpluses of the late 1990s are distant memory. The current deficit exceeds $2 trillion per year. That is $2 trillion of spending beyond tax revenue that must be financed through borrowing. But here is the critical point. The deficit is structural, not cyclical. It exists regardless of economic conditions. It exists regardless of which party controls Congress. It exists because spending is locked in through entitlements and interest payments, while the political will to cut or tax does not exist. Germany faced the same dynamic. Cutting spending would cause social unrest. Raising taxes would crash the economy. The only politically viable option was printing. The deficits became permanent because no other solution was acceptable. America faces identical constraints. Cutting Social Security would be political suicide. Raising taxes sufficiently would trigger recession. The only path forward is debt monetization. We just call it quantitative easing instead of money printing. Stage 2 is complete. The deficits are permanent. The printing is inevitable. Stage 3. Central bank debt monetization. This is where currency destruction begins in earnest. The government issues debt. The central bank buys it with created money. The money supply expands. The currency begins to weaken. In Weimar Germany, the Reichsbank began aggressive bond purchases in 1919. Their balance sheet expanded dramatically. The money supply doubled, then tripled, then grew exponentially. Officials claimed the purchases were necessary to maintain liquidity and stability. They said the alternative was economic collapse. In America, the Federal Reserve has followed the identical playbook. Quantitative easing began in 2008 during the financial crisis. The Fed's balance sheet was $900 billion before the crisis. It peaked at $9 trillion in 2022, a tenfold expansion in 14 years. The Fed bought Treasury bonds, trillions of dollars worth. The Treasury issued debt to finance deficits. The Fed bought that debt with dollars created from nothing. The government spent money that would not have existed without central bank intervention. They called it emergency measures. They called it temporary support. They called it market functioning operations. They never called it money printing. But money printing is exactly what it was. The COVID response accelerated the process. In 2020 alone, the Fed created more money than in the previous century combined. The money supply expanded 40% in 2 years. Trillions of dollars injected into an economy that could not absorb them productively. The Fed claims it is now doing quantitative tightening, reducing its balance sheet, reversing the printing. But the balance sheet remains over $7 trillion. The government is still running $2 trillion deficits. Someone must buy the bonds. When the Fed steps back, rates spike and markets wobble. Stage 3 is active. The printing has begun. The only question is how fast it accelerates. Stage 4. Inflation takes hold and is initially dismissed. In Weimar Germany, prices began rising in 1920 and 1921. Officials said it was temporary. Supply chain disruptions from the war, pent-up demand, external factors beyond Germany's control. They said inflation was moderate and manageable. They said the central bank had the tools to control it. They said the worst was behind them. And for a while, it seemed true. Inflation was elevated, but not alarming. Life continued. The currency still functioned. The denial phase is critical. It is when action could still prevent catastrophe. It is when the printing could be stopped and the damage contained. But denial prevents action. Officials believe their own reassurances. The public trusts official statements. By the time denial breaks, it is too late. In America, we lived through this phase in 2021 and 2022. Inflation spiked to 9%. The Fed said it was transitory. Supply chain issues from COVID, pent-up demand, temporary factors that would resolve on their own. They were wrong. Inflation persisted. Rate hikes eventually brought the headline number down, but prices never fell. They simply rose more slowly. The damage was done. The dollar lost 20% of its purchasing power in 3 years. And here is what officials are not telling you. The inflation was suppressed, not cured. The $7 trillion still sitting on the Fed's balance sheet is inflationary potential waiting to be released. The $2 trillion annual deficit requires ongoing monetization. The factors that caused inflation remain in place. Stage 4 has passed. Inflation arrived, it was dismissed, it was suppressed, but the underlying causes persist. Stage 5. The acceleration phase. This is where Germany transitioned from high inflation to hyperinflation. And this is where America is heading. In Weimar, Germany, 1922 was the year everything accelerated. Reparations pressure increased. The government needed more money. The Reichsbank printed faster. Inflation that had been 50% per year became 100%, then 200%, then 400%. Each month worse than the last. The psychology shifted. People stopped believing inflation was temporary. They started spending money immediately because holding it meant losing value. They converted marks to goods, to foreign currency, to anything tangible. This velocity increase made inflation worse. The same amount of money changing hands faster creates more price pressure. Businesses could not plan. They raised prices daily, then hourly. Workers demanded payment in real time. The economy began to dysfunction. Trade became difficult because pricing was unstable. Investment stopped because returns could not be calculated. In America, the acceleration phase has not fully arrived, but the preconditions are in place. The reverse repo facility, which was a $2.5 trillion buffer, has drained to under $500 billion. The Treasury must refinance $8 trillion in debt this year at higher rates. Interest payments on the national debt now exceed the defense budget. The deficit is getting worse, not better. Entitlement spending is increasing as boomers retire. Tax revenue is constrained by a slowing economy. The gap must be filled with borrowing. And when private demand for treasuries weakens, the Fed must step in. Watch for the signs of acceleration. Rising gold prices signal currency distrust. Rising treasury yields signal insufficient demand. Rising credit spreads signal financial stress. All three are elevated right now. The parallel to 1922 Germany is striking. They thought they had inflation under control. They thought the worst was past. They did not see the acceleration coming until it was upon them. Stage 6. Currency collapse, November 1923. The mark ceased to function as money. Prices changed hourly. A newspaper that cost 1 mark in 1921 cost 70 million marks by late 1923. People burned money for heat because it was cheaper than buying firewood with money. The government introduced a new currency, the Rentenmark, backed by land and industrial assets. The old marks became wallpaper. Savings denominated in marks became worthless. An entire generation was wiped out. Those who held real assets, gold, silver, foreign currency, land, productive businesses, survived. Those who trusted paper promises were destroyed. I am not predicting that 2026 will see the dollar replaced with a new currency. I am showing you the pattern, the stages, the progression, and we are uncomfortably far along that progression. Let me explain exactly how the Weimar parallel affects you personally, because this is not a history lesson. This is a warning about your future. First, your savings are at risk. Germans who saved in marks lost everything. They did nothing wrong. They were prudent, disciplined. They saved for retirement, for their children, for emergencies, and their savings became worthless. If you hold your wealth in dollars, in bank accounts, in money market funds, in bonds, you are exposed to the same risk. Not the risk of total collapse tomorrow. The risk of gradual destruction year by year, accelerating as the stages progress. A dollar today buys what 4 cents bought in 1913. That is 96% destruction over 110 years. The Weimar mark lost 96% of its value in 18 months. The speed differs. The destination is the same. Second, your wages will lag. During Weimar hyperinflation, wages rose, but never fast enough. Workers were always behind. By the time they received a raise, prices had risen further. Their standard of living declined even as nominal income increased. If acceleration arrives in America, your salary will not keep pace. Your raises will trail inflation. Your purchasing power will erode despite working harder and earning more. The money illusion will break. You will feel poorer because you will be poorer. Third, your debts may become assets. This is the perverse flip side. In Weimar Germany, debtors benefited. If you owed 10,000 marks on your house and inflation made 10,000 marks worthless, you effectively got a free house. Debts were inflated away. Those with fixed-rate mortgages on real assets benefited enormously. They paid back borrowed money with currency worth a fraction of what they borrowed. Creditors were destroyed. Debtors were liberated. If you have fixed-rate debt on real assets, inflation is your friend. If you are a creditor, if you hold bonds or savings accounts, inflation is your enemy. Fourth, social instability will increase. The Weimar hyperinflation did not end with currency reform. It ended with social collapse. The middle class was destroyed. Their savings gone. Their faith in institutions shattered. They turned to extremism. The rise of the Nazi Party was a direct consequence of Weimar's economic destruction. When people lose everything, they become desperate. They seek scapegoats. They embrace radical solutions. If America experiences severe inflation, the social consequences will extend far beyond economics. Prepare for instability. Fifth, timing matters enormously. Germans who converted marks to real assets in 1921 preserved their wealth. Germans who waited until 1923 lost everything. The window of opportunity closed rapidly. If the Weimar pattern holds, the window for Americans is closing now. Not in 2026. Now. The stages are progressing. The acceleration is approaching. Those who act early will be protected. Those who wait will be victims. So how do you protect yourself from a Weimar scenario? What did the survivors do, and how do you replicate their strategy? Step 1. Study what worked in Weimar. Not everyone was destroyed. Some Germans navigated the hyperinflation successfully. They shared common characteristics. They held real assets: gold, silver, land, productive businesses. They held foreign currency, particularly dollars and Swiss francs. They minimized exposure to marks. They converted savings to tangible value early, before the acceleration phase. The German industrialists who owned factories emerged stronger. Their businesses had real assets, produced real goods, and could reprice in real time. The farmers who owned land survived. They could feed themselves and sell surplus for real value. The savers who held marks in banks were wiped out. The pensioners who depended on fixed payments were impoverished. The prudent middle class was destroyed. Step 2. Build a physical precious metals position immediately. Gold and silver were the ultimate safe havens in Weimar Germany. An ounce of gold bought a modest house in 1923. The same ounce that had bought a suit in 1919. If you have $500, buy 15 ounces of silver, physical metal in your possession. This is your starter insurance against currency destruction. If you have $2,500, buy 70 ounces of silver and a quarter ounce of gold. Diversify within precious metals. If you have $10,000, buy 200 ounces of silver and 1 full ounce of gold. Consider splitting storage between home and a private vault. If you have $50,000, allocate $15,000 to physical metals, 400 to 500 ounces of silver, 3 to 4 ounces of gold. Consider international storage for a portion. If you have $100,000 or more, target 25% to 30% in physical precious metals. This is what the Weimar survivors held. Mirror their allocation. Step 3. Consider fixed-rate debt on real assets. This is counterintuitive but historically validated. In Weimar Germany, mortgage debt was inflated away. Those who borrowed to buy real estate before hyperinflation owned their homes free and clear afterward. If you can lock in fixed-rate debt at current levels on productive assets like rental property, you are positioned for the same dynamic. Inflation destroys the real value of your debt while the asset appreciates in nominal terms. This is not advice to borrow recklessly. It is recognition that fixed-rate debt on real assets is a hedge against currency destruction. Step 4. Diversify currency exposure. Weimar survivors held foreign currencies. Dollars and Swiss francs preserved value when marks collapsed. They allowed purchases when marks would not be accepted. Consider holding some savings in foreign currencies. Swiss francs, Singapore dollars, currencies of fiscally responsible nations. This is not about abandoning the dollar. It is about diversifying against dollar-specific risk. Step 5. Acquire productive assets. Weimar survivors owned businesses, farms, and rental properties. Assets that generated income in real terms. Assets that could reprice as the currency fell. Consider income-producing assets. Rental real estate, small businesses, productive land, assets that generate cash flow regardless of currency conditions. The wealthier you are, the more this applies. Step 6. Prepare for social instability. Weimar's aftermath was not peaceful. It was turbulent. Extremism rose. Institutions failed. The social fabric tore. Build resilience beyond financial preparation. Strong community ties. Skills that are valuable regardless of economic conditions. The ability to provide for yourself if systems break down. The Weimar parallel is not just about money. It is about surviving a period of transformation that destroyed the old order and replaced it with something darker. Prepare comprehensively. The Weimar Republic collapsed in 6 stages: debt accumulation, permanent deficits, central bank monetization, inflation denial, acceleration, currency collapse. America has completed stages 1 through 4. Stage 5, the acceleration, is beginning. Stage 6 arrives when confidence breaks. In Weimar Germany, the entire process took 3 years from early inflation to total collapse. If the pattern holds, America's timeline points toward 2026. But there is one specific indicator that tracked the Weimar collapse in real time. It predicted the acceleration phase 6 months before it arrived. German economists watched it obsessively, and for the first time since records have been kept, that indicator is flashing the same signal in America today. I reveal exactly what that indicator is and what it is telling us in this video right here. Click it now. The Weimar Rewind is not history. It is prophecy. Make sure you are ready for what comes next. I will see you there.